All right, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Hopefully everybody is here in the right place. This is a webinar from the Social Mobility Commission called Mitigating the Impact of COVID-19 on Social Mobility. This is a webinar for employers who represented across industries. So this will be a general webinar looking at how you as an employer can mitigate the impact that the current pandemic is having on social mobility. We are joined today by several folks you will meet along the way. My name is Lindsay Turner-Trammell. I am part of the Secretariat for the Social Mobility Commission. My title is Head of Policy and Innovation, and I will be starting us through today. We're going to start first, though, with some workshop etiquette. If I can ask Nina to move to the next slide, please. Hopefully by now we all know the drill on these types of webinars. If you can start by please muting yourself. And I can hear some noise. So those who are not muted, I will just warn that my colleague Anya will be going through and muting you on your behalf. So please just be aware of that. We also have quite a full house today. So we'd ask that everyone please turn off your video if you're not presenting. And that will just give us the best chances of having a smooth webinar. So please remain on mute, turn your video off. As again, you should hopefully be socialized too now, given the pandemic, to please use the chat box. We are going to be putting throughout the webinar a couple of poll questions as a way to kind of understand who you are and how we can better serve you in future webinars. So my colleague Anya is hopefully starting a poll in the chat box now. So please look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little conversation chat box icon. Click that. The meeting chat should open in the right hand side of your screen. And we would love for you to use that chat box. And in particular, please use it to ask questions or make comments. We will not have time to take a Q&A today on this hour-long webinar, but what we will be doing is collecting those questions and putting it to a panel of experts, including ourselves, and we will respond to you with those answers via email after the webinar. So please keep those questions coming, and if it's something quick and easy we can respond to, someone from the Commission will respond in the chat box. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, so please bear that in mind, and it will be circulated after we're done, along with the slides. Next slide, please, Nina. So it is my tremendous pleasure to introduce you all to Stephen Cooper, a Social Mobility Commissioner. Stephen has 32 years of experience in the banking industry. He has held the posts of CEO of Barclaycard Business in the payments division and CEO of personal banking at Barclays for the UK and Europe. For the past year, Stephen has been leading C. Hoare and Company as Chief Executive Officer, and he has been serving as a Commissioner on the Social Mobility Commission. So thank you so much for joining us, Stephen, and over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And as you said that, my 13-year-old son, who is homeschooling next to me at the moment, pulled a face. So yeah, something grand. I'm not sure it was for him. But anyway, great to see so many different employers from different sectors taking the time to listen into this webinar and to participate. If nothing else, whilst in lockdown, getting perspectives, thoughts, views from others, I hope will stimulate thinking and takeaways for you. It's great to see so many forward-thinking people dialing in, so that thank you. I think we are Thursday, and probably the most emotional highlight of my week is the clapathon on a Thursday night at 8 o'clock, which I'm sure we all participate in. And I'm struck by the number of people we are reliant on, not just the brilliant NHS and care workers, but delivery drivers, etc., etc., all of whom are typically in the more lower paid roles, many of whom come from a more disadvantaged background. And that's really what social mobility is all about. And I hope that those roles become less low paid going forward. And I hope roles like that become more fulfilling and more important. And I hope employers like ourselves do more to help people and in those roles and progress into more senior roles beyond that. But the Social Mobility Commission itself is an independent statutory body which monitors progress towards improving social mobility in the UK and promotes social mobility across England. And that sort of our focus really is to support you as employers and leading employers to increase socio-economic diversity of the workforce. And when I say that, I'm often asked, why is that important? I mean, why bother? Why care? And the reality is, in addition to what I've already talked about in terms of the emotional reliance that I think a lot of us place on lower paid people at the moment, is that there is a business case. As a chief executive of a business, I think very hard when I see, for example, across the 7 leading law firms across the UK, employees educated at schools, i.e. not private education, not further education, are 75% more likely to be in the top decile of performers than those educated in independent schools, for example. I'm struck that by 43% of businesses with a more diverse workforce have higher profits. I'm struck by that building a more diverse, visibly diverse workforce also signals a commitment to inclusion and improving society, which is deeply important to millennials, and I think will be deeply important to wider society as we come out of this pandemic. So I think it really is important, and there's a reason to take note of that. In my own world, which is running a private bank, those who generate wealth don't necessarily come from a privileged background. Increasingly, those who are generating wealth come from a diverse range of backgrounds, including several entrepreneurs, sporting people, etc., who come from a disadvantaged background. So I'm thinking very hard as we change the way we recruit people, looking much more around apprenticeships and how we find those people from more diverse backgrounds to bring that diverse perspective into the business, but also help people to be the very best they can be. And I think as you go into sort of through COVID, that's becoming much more important. Social mobility has stagnated across the UK. At one level, that's not as bad as it sounds, because at least it's not got worse. But I think there's a real potential that it could get worse as we come out of COVID-19 as a pandemic. There will be more unemployment. The nature of working, I think, will change quite dramatically. Many businesses have actually, including probably most of those represented on this webinar, are able to operate remotely. So what does that mean for the future of the workplace? And that has potential to make life harder for social mobility. I think there's an opportunity for us to make it better for social mobility, and I'm hoping this will be part of that. And I do think how businesses treat others, treat their supply chains, treat their employees, treat their wider communities at this moment in time and for the foreseeable future will be really thought about by the customers of those organizations. So I think we have an opportunity to change the agenda a little bit on social mobility. So it's really to say thank you for taking the time to dial in. We would love to hear from your views as questions, as Lindsay pointed out, to see what else we can do to make life easier for you, and look forward to hearing the conversation. Lindsay, back over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. Nina, if you'll please move us over to the next slide. So today's webinar was created in partnership with a heap of fantastic organizations. We want to thank you all with our whole heart for your contributions, and we hope that this therefore reflects the work that not only the Commission is doing right now in the pandemic, but a range of different organizations, including the Pledge, the Foundation, and others. Next slide, please. So today's webinar, I'm going to touch quite quickly on what is social mobility. We'll touch then on what was the state of social mobility prior to COVID to set the scene, what the immediate impacts are that we see, and then we'll lead to why you should care and what exactly you can be doing with it. So next slide, please. So starting with what is social mobility? So the technical definition is the link between a person's occupational income and the occupational income of their parents. But put a bit more simply, it's about ensuring your background doesn't determine your future. And for employers, it's about ensuring that your workforce, you're getting the best and most diverse people in that they can to drive your business performance, and then progressing them up through the business as well. I'm just going to give a quick reminder to those not already on mute with their video off to please do so we can avoid some background feedback. Thank you. And Nina, next slide, please. So the unfortunate reality is that prior to COVID-19, social mobility has been quite poor in the UK for a number of years. We at the Commission have spent years looking at social mobility and studying it, and we pulled together just a couple of statistics to kind of highlight this type of stagnation and poor performance in social mobility. We know, for example, that right now within the workforce, in professional jobs, and by professional, I should say we're using the ONS definition there, professional. We include some examples at the bottom of the slide by what we mean of a professional job. But within professional jobs, only 34% of people from working class backgrounds enter into the professions. And we see that if you flip that as well and look at what movement happens from people from professional jobs into working class jobs, we see a similar level of stagnation. So effectively, the role that your parents, the jobs that your parents did, is a very high predictor of what type of job you will do in the future as well. We haven't been able to break that link. That then reflects in earnings outcomes. So people from working class background across our whole society earn 24% less per year than those from professional backgrounds. But now you might be looking at this a bit skeptically and saying, okay, well, let's compare like for like, not looking across the whole population. And you would be a very good statistics person if you said that. Well, looking then at like for like, within professional jobs, those from working class backgrounds still have a 17% pay gap compared to their peers who are from a professional background. So what this is showing us is that even within the workplace, if you enter from a working class background, you enter into a professional job, you are still on average going to be paid significantly less than someone who grew up in a more privileged background. We then see this reflected, these types of disparities reflected in who gets access to training, both in the workplace and within state-funded adult education, with almost half of adults from lower socioeconomic backgrounds receiving no training since leaving school. And we see this in geographic opportunities. London is the hub for where you can have the most opportunity in our country exists to progress in the workplace. However, those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are less likely to move, and significantly less likely to move to London in particular to take advantage of those. So the state of social mobility was rather grim pre-COVID. Can we flip to the next slide, please? So now we're going to look at, okay, what is the potential impact of COVID? And painting with a broad brush, it has the potential to really grow those gaps even more. So we're going to break this up into what is the immediate impact we're seeing on those in education right now, in secondary education in particular, and then we'll look at those in the workplace. And I should want to flag really carefully at the start of this that these are just immediate, these are not comprehensive, and this is just, we will, as time goes on, we will know more about what's happening. So we do not expect this to be a holistic look, but rather a guide for you to understand as a business when you're thinking about your outreach and progression pathways into the business and hiring pathways, what should you be thinking about? So for those in secondary education, the issues right now can start with access to jobs. So employer engagement at schools, work experience and apprenticeships are largely going to be reduced or changed quite significantly. We've seen anecdotally, for example, stories of students who are looking to get into the medical field. Obviously right now, it's very understandable that work experience placements at hospitals are being closed off, but that means or reduced, and that has meant that for those that don't have networks and can't tap into those networks to get the small placements that exist, are missing out on those opportunities, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are much less likely to have the types of networks to be able to get that kind of pull. So there's going to be an effect on the most disadvantaged cohort. Apprenticeships programs, for those of you who run them, you're, I'm sure, in communication with your providers that furloughs, redundancies, financial strain, potential impacts to the providers themselves mean that apprenticeship programs are at risk. There are massive gaps in digital learning for students in secondary education. If you don't have a quiet place to work, if your parents are working as a key worker and not able to homeschool, or if they themselves don't have the confidence or the ability to know how to teach their children at home, or the ability to pay for tutoring, all of these barriers are going to compound. And once school does get back into session, we are likely to see a really significant educational gap in who has gotten access to some form of learning at the moment and who has had none. So moving on to those within the workplace on the next slide, please. Give it a moment to lag. Thank you. So within the workplace, around 15% of employees in the work in a sector that is either largely or entirely shut down by COVID-19. And unfortunately, this represents a lot of industries where people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are employed. Hotels, restaurants, passenger transport, personal services, etc. So what's the wider kind of broad brush impact? Well, there's a digital access and skills background. Digital exclusion is social exclusion. 88% of those earning less than £12,000 per year do not have good digital access. So how can you work from home even if you had the opportunity to if you don't have digital access? There's a massive financial stability problem. Lower earners are 7 times as likely as high earners to have worked in a sector that's now shut down. And those at the most at-risk sectors and occupations are 25% more likely than average to have no savings. So to weather this crisis financially is a massive problem. For under 25s, this lockdown and the subsequent recession is likely to hit them really hard. We see this in every recession, that disadvantaged young people in particular are some of the most harmed groups in a recession in terms of their future labour market outcomes. So they are, again, least likely to be able to bounce back once the economy improves. They're going to need more support and more direct outreach. Job training offers will be reduced, compounding gaps in the workplace. We already saw that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are less likely to receive training anyway. In the moment where training is likely being stopped, progression opportunities and that class pay gap are likely to keep compounding. And then finally, of course, housing. Individuals in rented properties are more likely to be directly affected by the lockdown and are unable to work from home as well. So this is, again, quite grim. So we wanted to set that scene for you, kind of what we're here and looking at. And turning to the next slide, the key question for you as employers is, why should you care? And Stephen has touched on this really well already to highlight a few things that he's said. There is, of course, that moral argument, but there's also a business case, and quite a significant one. Leading companies are already doing their part to boost social mobility. We are seeing companies, many of whom are on this call, and we thank them for being here and for contributing to these slides. For those who are thinking about this and wanting to set themselves apart from the pack. We also find, as Stephen mentioned, diverse companies are successful companies, and this is even more important as many struggle to survive. Research shows that diverse companies are better at problem solving. They're better at overcoming issues when situations arise. Well, at the moment, we are having massive transformation in just about every single industry, every type of company, and having that diversity of experience and input is critical to overcoming the challenges right now. And those who have the longest journey often have the most to offer. Just because you're from a lower socioeconomic background doesn't mean you're not talented, doesn't mean you don't have a lot to give. And if you're missing out on that talent, you are missing out on experiences and on input that can be incredibly advantageous to your operations, and also to reducing some of your costs around recruitment and around retention. You'll see some of the statistics and research flagged here showing those business case links. And then finally, we all have a responsibility to stop the impacts of COVID. We all have a part to play to ensuring that recovery works for everyone. So we're here together in a shared sense of commitment that we want to play our part and we want to make this a bit better. So moving to the next slide, please. And with that, I believe I'm handing off to my colleague Nina to pick up and talk about, now that you know why you should care, what the situation is, what can you do about it? So Nina, over to you. Nina, you are on mute. I don't know if you are trying to talk right now, but we can't hear you if you are. Oh,
There we
dear.
go. That's better. Yeah. You got me now?
We do, but the presentation just went off screen. There we go. It's coming back.
Right. Okay. That's all right. Sorry about that. So what I was wanting to say was, Stephen and Lindsay have obviously talked a lot about the situation of social mobility before COVID-19 and what's happening now. I was keen just to bring some faces to the conversation. Now, I know that there's a lot of reports in the news, and it almost feels like there's a lot of statistics that are bandied about. And for me, it came very real when someone was talking about their own statistic. And actually, that was their mother. So we were very keen to talk about the fact that this current pandemic is affecting real people. So this is people like Junior Goldsmith, who is at school and who will have aspirations, and because of the pandemic, almost their future is on hold because they're not necessarily getting the education that they would get from school. You may have people like April Jackson, who is at the start of their career, and they are someone who might be on internships or apprenticeships. And because of the situation, again, they're struggling maybe to compete with people in the market in the future when we come out of the COVID-19 situation. And then there may be people who are further in their career, or even people who are business owners in the community who are obviously having to struggle with the situation. And we just really wanted to bring this context to you, so it's not all about statistics, it's about individuals and the impact that COVID-19 is having on these individuals. So what we were keen to do is now to give you this practical advice. Now, obviously, this is coming from ourselves, the Social Mobility Commission, and the partners that Lindsay mentioned at the start of the call. So the practical advice that we will be giving you will be around our own employers toolkit. So this is around the outreach, hiring and progression. So this is almost the employees' experience with yourselves. And then more from a business enablers position, the leadership, the data and the advocacy. We won't be covering wider economic challenges that we're finding because of COVID-19. So I just want to obviously enable you to understand that and the conversation and the practical advice that we'll be giving you on this call. So initially, I'll just take you through the slides, as I know that there potentially might be a lag on people's screens. So what we'll go through in each side is almost on the left-hand side, you'll note where we talk about the impact we believe COVID-19 is having on said interventions. The recommendations and actions that ourselves and our partners have come together are what we feel are must-dos in the situation. And because of these actions, what we then feel can be the potential outcomes because of your actions. So when it comes to outreach, obviously, we've talked a lot about what has stopped. Lindsay, thank you for covering those, but we know that outreach and work experience has reduced in the main, and in often cases it has stopped. Similarly, internships are on hold. So because of that influence that individuals who are at school would have received, now they're not likely to potentially look outside of their own areas for potential career aspirations. We know this potentially will have a longer term impact when you're actually looking at unemployment increasing after education, and also that long-term unemployment for the older workforce. So what can you do to help overcome this? So the top one for us is about maximising and developing the current relationships that you have with charity or community partners. So you may already be doing this, but it's looking at actually what outreach and work experience programs can you still run in the current climate. So what are the virtual options that you could do? And if it isn't work experience because most of your workforce are at home, then it's looking at, okay, well, how can we give them skills for entering the job market? So looking at that mentoring or coaching about job interview skills or writing CVs. So it's just looking at that support in a different light. The other thing we would recommend is obviously honouring your current partnerships, but if you are able to assess your funding and find that you can fund else in addition to what you're already doing with your partnerships, it's looking at how you could channel that funding. One example obviously is the distribution of tech devices, which Lindsay's already called out. A lot of people in lower socio-economic backgrounds might not have the ability to get onto online, and hence this is something that your organisation could do there. This won't be for all, but there may be a case that your employees want to get more involved. We know, obviously, Stephen's already mentioned about the community spirit that we've seen across the country. So it's about harnessing this community spirit within your employees. And maybe rather than them going off doing their own thing, maybe you could channel that and actually form a volunteering group, again, linking up with the work that you're potentially doing with your community partners. And the underlying thing we would say is don't let safeguarding be a block. So we realise a lot of this is then reaching out and being in touch with people in their homes. So there may be some concerns, but we've provided some links about safeguarding in this kind of environment. So please don't let this be a block or a reason not to do this kind of activity. And we believe, because of this continued work, that actually you can keep that momentum for individuals so they still can aspire to look at alternatives than what they're used to for work employment. If you are able to offer coaching or mentoring, then you can almost replace what they would be getting at schools. Often we know that at GCSE or A-level stages in the summer, they would be getting education around employment and job offers and writing CVs. So again, if that's something you can offer in your mentoring and coaching, that can help replace what they're missing from schools. And we believe because of all this activity, then obviously their skills are likely to help them get jobs and hence improve the likelihood of them gaining work experience when we start to return to normal. So, for example, for someone like junior at school, if they're in touch with these virtual schemes, it still gives them that motivation to keep studying when maybe their home environment wouldn't normally give them that. We wanted to give you an example of practical experience of how this is happening, and Baker McKenzie are actually looking, or they have developed their programme now into a virtual scheme. So what they have done is they have contacted all individuals who are undertaking their legal practice course, and they're offering support now through home working. And for their normal vacation schemes, they're actually doing this virtually. And as well for a remote vacation scheme, they're looking to plan for the summer in case, obviously, things haven't changed by the summer. So there's organisations that have already made that change, and I imagine a lot of you on the call are part of that. So the next one we wanted to cover is hiring. Now, obviously, we've mentioned, and I'm sure yourselves are known, that there's been a massive reduction in recruitment. We know that pupils who aren't going to be sitting GCSEs and A-levels will be getting predicted grades. Now, for some, like myself, that would have been an advantage. But for some groups, certainly BAME women, this isn't statistically always accurate for them, and they achieve better grades actually sitting those exams. So if you are actually recruiting at the moment, there may be an element of unconscious bias moving into conversations because you are switching to online. So because of all these added challenges, we imagine there's going to be an increased likelihood of NEETs. And Lindsay's already mentioned about the fact that we know in downturns that those that are disadvantaged are more affected. So the actions we are recommending you're taking is that if you are still recruiting, then please look at adapting all of this for online recruitment. I've mentioned about the unconscious bias. So it's forming some protocols so your managers are aware of the environments or challenges that individuals are likely to have if they're having interviews over the phone. Obviously, Lindsay had mentioned that they've probably not got the work environment or the space to have a formal interview over the phone. So it's just taking that into account of what might be going on behind them or distracting them. And it's also providing the additional guidance to individuals so they don't get flustered if things like that do happen. Now, double contextualisation is something that we've recommended. Now, contextualisation is something probably that a number of you are already familiar with. So this is where obviously your recruitment process looks at the individual's background and their education and where they went to school and the grades they then attained in that environment. So what we're suggesting is you actually almost put another lens over that, which is almost the COVID-19 lens. So you're thinking about, OK, well, that circumstance is the standard. And now also they've got COVID-19 to deal with on top of that. So actually, how is that going to affect this individual? and the potential grades they achieved or whatever. So this isn't just for now, this is for future years, and we just need to make sure that we're aware of that. COVID-19 for some might finish when the lockdown ends, but for a lot this is going to be an impact that they will have with them for many years to come. For those who might be already in the recruitment process, it's about that regular communication, so they still feel part of your organisation or business, and how you can keep that going. And where you are doing apprenticeships, from our side, we are keen that those apprenticeships keep going, and for traineeships as well. The other element we would say is, given what we've said about pupils receiving predicted grades, maybe now is the time to think about what grades are actually needed, and in fact whether you need to be emphasising skills and potential, and maybe removing qualifications or experience from that recruitment process. So we believe by these interventions, then the potential outcomes is the fact that, one, if you are doing a lot more online recruitment, then this is ultimately going to be a more inclusive way to recruit anyway for the long term. Because of this increased recruitment activity from a contextualised recruitment pathway, you're going to drive that diversity of talent into your workforce. And again, because hopefully you've embraced the removal of qualifications, or at least looked at what you think is really the minimum of requirement, again, that's going to help drive that increased talent through your pipeline. So again, for people like April Potential, who in the future might be challenged because they're going to be more experienced people on the workforce, she may actually find an advantage because she's supported through the process for coaching, and hence she can actually demonstrate her worth rather than being battled because other people have got more experience than her. So an example of this is with Accenture. So they run an apprentice recruitment scheme, which is a week-long programme, which is a tech taster. So it's for NEET candidates to come in to understand what it would be like to work for Accenture Technology. And part of this obviously is to gain them employability skills and confidence. Now, this is a face-to-face programme that they run in the spring, which unfortunately they've had to cancel. So what they've very quickly done is actually contacted all the candidates and offered them access to a digital skills academy. So they have access to obviously the skills they would have had face-to-face. They are running virtual training sessions around personal branding and how individuals can present themselves. And they've also run and advertised webinars that they've done, this is really about encouraging people and assisting candidates to apply directly for apprenticeships. So this is a wider thing that they're getting involved in. And for those that they've identified as high potentials, they've had phone and video calls, which actually has resulted some of these individuals being fast-tracked straight away to their virtual apprenticeship. One thing that they are also doing is they are looking to partner, or they are partnering with Movement to Work, about actually bringing this tech taster curriculum to a virtual programme, which they're due to pilot in May, ultimately to hope that more candidates can obviously go through the apprenticeship route. And this isn't just for Accenture. With their partnership with Movement to Work, the hope is obviously that other organisations will be able to use that work. So if that's something obviously that you're interested in, then let us know. We can put you in touch with the relevant people. Moving now on to progression. So obviously this is covering individuals who are in your organisation already. Now, we know, and we ourselves personally will know, that the impact, if you are able to work from home, there's a lot more challenges that you have to juggle with. Myself, as homeschooling, and know the juggle of working and homeschooling and life generally. And there's going to be added stresses that a multitude of individuals will be having, especially those from lower socio-economic backgrounds, where potentially they might have caring responsibilities. They may have the added stress of financial concerns, which Lindsay has already talked about, and maybe they don't have the environment where they can work and homeschool and separate rooms, etc. So all of this is going to build additional stress and pressure. There has been seen a repositioning of workforce, where organisations have repositioned their business model to obviously help in this situation. And there are times where we've noted training is either being reduced dramatically or stopped. And hence the performance is going to be very varied. So the focus on promotion, one, the conversations are probably not likely to be had at the moment. Certainly it's a lot more about business survival. Promotion opportunities are likely to be on frozen, and obviously you've then got this compounded with the fact that the outcome of individuals is going to be varied based on the other things that they're juggling. So the number of things that we've called out with our partners is, one, the training. Then we know that those from lower socio-economic background actually have less training than their peers anyway. So we don't want COVID-19 to build on that fact. So where possible, maintain those training programs. And if you can't, actually assess which training you still can offer. So look at those who maybe are from the low socioeconomic backgrounds and still offer training for those, or maybe where they've got reduced workload and hence the training still can be done. So it's understanding, if you have to cut the training, what training you really still can do to help that skills being developed. Now, the other thing is about FaceTime. Now, we know that we often might have water cooler conversations with our managers or leaders, bumping into them into the office. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen. And we know that those from a low socioeconomic background in the main are less confident and less likely to talk about and be confident about what they're doing, their work practices and their experience. So when you're having those FaceTime conversations, make sure they are inclusive to all. And it's not just those the most confident that are talking out and showcasing their work. And also it's about taking the time to have those development chats, which often gets forgotten about in the normal workplace, but you have those cooler conversations. So it's ensuring that you actually still make that time for those development chats. It also is an opportunity for you to start to look at your performance and review processes. So we've talked a lot about the fact that individuals are going to have a lot to juggle with and different things. So now might be the opportunity to look at your performance processes to actually say, okay, are they inclusive to all? Are we allocating work fairly? So if you are making assumptions that people can't get involved in certain projects, don't make those assumptions, have those conversations to make sure that your allocation of work is still doing fairly. And actually those individuals that are at the front line, let's take from those unique experiences that they're having, because that will help your organisation in the future real battle with change when things might happen. Review those progression pathways. So this is a great one, certainly from an apprentice level, to make sure that they're clearly documented. Again, I think this is because often individuals aren't aware of the pathways and it's done through word of mouth or conversations. So just make sure all of this is still clearly signposted. And where possible, think about the current climate and actually how this is changing how people work. So where you might have typically said a role is 9 to 5 or Monday to Friday, it's not actually being worked like that at the moment. So the workforce of the future, what could those job profiles look like? How could you actually change these to, again, help with that inclusivity? And because of all of this, we believe that, one, you'll get a more improved culture. So the conversations with your employees and your managers will help improve that emotional intelligence. We've talked about the fact that obviously the skill gap won't continue to grow. You'll help make sure that's on track. And this is also going to help with that diversity and the likelihood that employees will maintain that performance through the current COVID-19 and help them in the future. So an example of this is with KPMG. So they have a Grow Talent programme, which is for their diverse talent. And this previously, sorry, I'll just remind people if they could put themselves on mute, that would be brilliant. Don't worry, I'm waiting any moment for one of my 4 children to run in the room like the BBC presenter. Although I think we're probably all used to that now, so I don't need to apologise so much. But the perfect example is with KPMG. So they have a leadership programme, which they do at the moment for diverse talents. And actually, from this, they found that 40% of people who go on it have been promoted. But actually, now they've switched this to be digital, they've actually realised that they can connect with a lot more people than anticipated. So they actually envision that that success rate will improve. Now, I realise I'm doing a lot of talking now. This is a lot more around your business enablers. And I realise this is quite a challenging nut to crack given the circumstances that we're working in, and a lot of organisations will be in business survival mode. So we know that COVID-19 has impacted organisations very differently. And as I've mentioned, some of you will be in survival mode. So we're not saying you need to do all of this. It's taking what you can and making it work. But what we're clear in saying is that please do what you can to ensure that the gap doesn't become a gulf in social mobility. We know that there are redundancies, and we know because of the circumstances and individuals working from home, maybe if they're not used to that and they're missing that peer-to-peer connection, that there will be disengagement with employees. And this puts a lot of pressure on leaders to step up in an environment that they have never come across before. And this comes from the top. So again, it's not all about just the leaders, but we need to hear that message from the leaders, and then it disseminated down across all levels of management that this is something collectively you are tackling together as an organisation. So have leaders share their stories. I know certainly one of the organisations I was talking about, their HR director every week sends almost out a diary entry of what their week's been like. So this is anything from the challenge of, you know, teaching and trying to wash up, and then the dog's doing something or whatever, but it's trying to bring the real life situations, so those in the leaders aren't just seen as those in ivory towers, that this is affecting everybody. But it's also enabling employees to share those stories. So if you have some form of COVID-19 community group or something where people can share ideas and share stories. And the other thing is just ensuring that leaders and managers are reassuring employees of the support that is offered. And it is that continual reminder. So just because you sent an email around at the start of the situation explaining the sick leave and the bereavement leave and how things have changed, please don't assume that individual has kept those emails. Again, when you're having that conversation and those emails, remind people of what support is out there, whatever their situation or their circumstance, it will help them realise that your organisation is supporting them. I don't want it all to sound too doom and gloom. So for us, it's also about the importance of community work. We've talked already about harnessing your employees. So it's about ensuring that you celebrate the work that you're doing and you build this inclusivity across all of your communities and also your teams. So often you'll probably find that some teams might have set up WhatsApp groups or group conversations, which is brilliant because it's about bringing that connection. But it's just making sure that those are inclusive to all and they don't almost fall into the pub cliques that used to go out on a Friday night. It's inclusive for your teams and for individuals from all backgrounds. A great opportunity now is actually sending out an employee survey really to get an understanding of the impact of COVID-19 at the moment. And this will help you channel those interventions that you do. And also, one side of it is actually looking at your current HR and DI practices just to see how inclusive they are. And obviously the work that you're doing from a communication point and surveys will help feed into that. So ultimately, we feel from this leadership and culture actions, you will see, one, an understanding of how COVID-19 is affecting your employees, not just what you hear about in the news or from your colleagues in other organisations. Ultimately, it will help improve engagement. And as Lindsay's already talked about business performance. But really, it's about that personal connection. So your teams will be a lot more connected, which ultimately we know helps against team performance and business performance. But also there's a general belief that actually if you have that empathy across teams and across functions, that actually in the future there is that sense of improved cooperation and understanding. So how this is being done as an example, this is a great example of a lot of different things that they're doing. So one, they're ensuring that they're helping with the remote working. They've just made available the employee assistance program they've got, and they've got a frequently communicating with employees. They're expanding their self-learning and webinars. So everything that they have from face-to-face workshops, they are now doing remotely, and they're ensuring that they're having virtual check-ins with colleagues. So having these coffees and these drop-in sessions that we've talked about. but they're also actually started to create new groups. So I myself have got a group which is for working parents, which is great, because then you can talk to other people who have the challenge of working every hour possible, because you've got so many things that you're juggling with. But it's also about, obviously, if you've got financial concerns or caring concerns, being able to speak to people who can help you with that. Now, onto broader things in terms of advocacy, and then ultimately the data. So advocacy, again, this is going to be very varied depending on where your organisation is, and with it being in survival mode, or actually you're weathering the storm. And you'll find that often some of the organisations and some of you on the phone may have actually had to reposition your business model, and maybe you're delivering things, or you've had to move your workforce around, and hence the focus may be on the bottom line. You may find that you've got disengagement with your customers because they also have their own challenges. And ultimately, there is also that risk of stability in your supplier chain. So how can you help in a broader, wider landscape when it comes to social mobility? Now, clearly, the thing you're doing internally when it comes to commitment is something you can also do and share that you're doing. So there's a number of our partners who have platforms where you can talk about the work that you're doing, so other organisations can take from your business case studies and take it internally. That can help. Obviously, the Social Mobility Employer Index is still running, and they're still keen to demonstrate that actually social mobility is still something organisations are wanting to do, and even now realise the impact that COVID-19 is going to have. And also from ourselves, please get in touch and tell us about the work that you're doing and how you'd want to get involved in the work that we're doing. We ourselves have the State of the Nation report, which talks about cold spots. So if there are certain community areas, and maybe community areas that your organisations are based in, it's looking at actually, is there something you can do there? And when it comes more close to home about customer connections and suppliers, it's about having those open conversations again with your customers to form those connections, and actually whether this is something you can do together. And with your suppliers about whether there's any buffering you can do in terms of your agreements to support them if they are challenged financially. And I'm not sure whether you are aware, but there is the apprenticeship levy transfer. So if you are a large organisation and you haven't used the apprenticeship funds, that you can actually transfer that over to smaller businesses in your supply chain to help them in those situations from an apprenticeship point of view. So we envision that all of this, one, will help with great brand association, but also it's going to help with your customer engagement and really strengthen those relationships with your suppliers for now, and obviously when we move out of this. An example of this is with Compass, where they have recognised their frontline workforce, and they're actually rewarding them, one, with food, but financial rewards. They have worked in their communities where they are donating money to food banks. And they're also looking at the wider national crisis, where actually they've redeployed some of their staff to help in other environments, and they've also got a YouTube channel. I've not looked it up myself yet, but again, it's just what they're doing to try and help the community at large. And the final one, although I dare say not the last one on the list, is about data. Now, again, I don't want to go through too much in impact because a lot of this we've already talked about, but you may find that a lot of the social mobility interventions that you did do, you now can't, and you're trying to decide what you should continue with during the current climate. So one thing from our side is certainly about data collection. So now is for us is a critical time to do this data collection, and we ourselves have a great example of how HMRC actually maximised their response rate from a questionnaire, which we ourselves have our questionnaire on the Employers Toolkit. But get that data, and because of that, this enables you then to decide which social mobility interventions you can continue with, if not all, and that's an informed decision as opposed to just taking a guess at that. The communication piece, when you're doing this data collection, again, is about that leader demonstrating why it's important for you to do this at this time when potentially your focus is elsewhere. And for us, a big point is actually publicising this, sharing these results, one internally, but also externally. So again, you're sharing your commitment to social mobility, even in the current climate and challenges that we all have. Because of this data collection, one, it's going to help you understand your employee demographics as a whole anyway. It's also going to help you then make informed decisions around policies, and I've mentioned obviously interventions. So for us, data collection is not something to stop doing now. It's actually something to do even more so, because then whatever business decisions you make, it's because of an informed decision from the back of that data. Now, we also have a number of additional resources that we have shared with you. We've got our own microsite and movement microsite, which is a general toolkit advice, not COVID-19 specific, but a number of our partners have got COVID-19 specific websites and responses. So we've shared that with you for you to dive deeper. But from our side, we just want to make sure that obviously the interventions that you do now can continue really to try and stop this gap becoming a gulf. Lindsay, I shall pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Oh, I'm hearing a bit better. Nina, can you mute yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to work out how.
Here we go.
Sorry.
So just to say a reminder, thank you so much. We've had a really engaged chat box, lots of commentary on digital gaps in particular. So thank you for that. We'll keep the chat box and the slides open for a few moments after the webinar so that if you have other questions to please add them in, and we will be sure to circle back around to you on that. They will be answered by not only us, but we are lining up a panel of other experts in addition to ourselves to respond and give you a range of input. So please do keep asking questions. And Nina, if you can put us on to the last slide. I think one of the things that you can be aware of is that hopefully throughout this webinar is that this pandemic has shone a light on the fact that your background not only determines your future in this country, but it's also determining how you are being affected by this disaster. But the positive side of this is that you as employers can make a difference in this. We have so many of our key workers in this country who are propping us up. There are food delivery drivers, there are grocers, there are binmen, there are NHS staff, of course, and they are on the front lines, and they are more than overwhelmingly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and they are supporting our society in a moment where the rest of us need it most. So we should do our bit